Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for being part of a church that cares about all the details of things, not just 60 minutes on Sunday, which is too common today. But I think my assignment is the kind of the first hour. I'm going to just talk about some of the things going on and why we as Christians need to obey what the Bible has told us anyway. We're supposed to be sober-minded, because we realize that this world is a battlefield, it's not a playground, and we realize that the enemy is alive and well in spreading lies and deceit, in stealing the hearts and minds of our children, and so we have to be engaged in this battle. God took me out of being more of a businessman to start getting involved in this kind of thing because of my own children. I have 9 children, and I saw about 15 plus years ago, if we keep going down the road we're headed, eventually we're going to get there. It's going to be a nightmare. I had been brought up where we understood communism and socialism, and we understood the worldviews and things. But it was even living in Idaho, out in the country. I remember the very breakfast, looking at all of them, and I thought, my whole life, our country's been going the wrong direction, regardless of who was president, regardless of who. It's always been, why is that? And of course, the movies kind of came from that, where I started to realize it's a purposeful change. And a lot of you, if you're not aware of that, that's kind of a first big step to engage, stepping into this battle and being effective and understanding the times, is realizing, no, everything that has happened to America in the last 70, 80, 90 years is purposeful. There were people and groups behind the scenes purposely making sure we turned away from God and His principles. And we made sure He was removed from the educational system. And we made sure that our children were taught to follow the gods of the marketplace. And so all those things are so purposeful that that first step, though, is acknowledging we're in a war, like Ephesians 6 tells us anyway. But yes, even in America, where we still have such a wonderful life, because God has so blessed this country, because we had chosen to do things His way, it's easy to lull ourselves to sleep and not think it's that way. In 2 Timothy 3, it says this: "This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud." I mean, just think of all these words in relation to our culture today. Blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affections. Each one of these you could give a whole sermon on. You know, how could a mother abort her child? Because she doesn't have natural affections anymore. It goes in the last days, they're not going to have that, where they could do something like that, something that would be unthinkable whether you were saved or lost. That's my child. I would never allow something to happen to that baby. Truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good. That's when we've seen over my lifetime just ramp up. When I was a young person in the 1970s, still, even a lost man knew what was right and wrong. And if he did what was wrong, which they still did, he was ashamed of it, so he'd go do it down the dark alley around the corner at nighttime. And he knew that for children, you talk about the good things, and the good things are the good things. They would even give you 10 commandments, that's a good thing, I don't obey them, but those are good things. But that's all just totally changed my life. Where now, how evil could you be? You know, to you pro-lifers, and where they've taken God's words and redefined what it means to be evil, when He, of course, is the only one that has authority to define what's evil, what's good, what's bad, how are things to operate. But that one I've seen, it's turned on the good now, which it tells us it will happen. Traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. Having a form of godliness, that's the grand illusion of the modern church, is having a form of God. It looks like, I think it's a church. Yeah, they're going in there. There's Bibles in the pews and whatever, but denying the power thereof. From such, turn away. And so that's something that God told us, yeah, this is what's going to be happening. And so we need to be aware of that. Yeah, again, especially as Christians, because we have the hope and we have the real answers for things. You know, the lost world out there is a sucker for everything that sounds good because they don't have the answers for things. That's why we have to be speaking up. You have to, if you know the truth, you have to speak the truth. If someone says a lie in your presence, you must confront it. You have to. That's the most loving thing you could possibly do. To be silent in the presence of a lie is to condone it, and then it's to lie to everyone else as if, no, I was fine with what was said. And you can't do that. And I'll talk more about that at the end, but Alexander Solzhenitsyn talked about that, and it's a key to life, is living like that. Now, all of you would know that Christ has his followers here on earth. And hopefully every one of you are one of his disciples and one of his followers. But I think a lot of times we don't realize Satan has his followers too. And as I've studied things for a long time now in the Marxist communist movement, I realize those are all Satan's disciples. Those are his followers. And they're so committed to the cause. That's why they've been so successful. They're 10 times more committed than we are in every way possible. I've read so many biographies. One was by Whitaker Chambers, and it was a book called Witness. It's an incredible book to read. But he was in the communist apparatus of Washington, D.C. back in the 30s, 1930s. And he's working his way into our government, as so many of them were, to start subverting us from within. But he became a Christian. And all of a sudden he realized, uh-oh, wait a minute. I got a problem. Because this system I follow and believe in says there is no God. Man is God. And he started to realize, and you know what directed him to that? I love the story he tells in his own words, but he was watching his little daughter eat breakfast one morning. This is how powerful God is. And this top communist official, he said, I noticed the design of her ear, and I realized there has to be a designer. And he said, I threw that out of my mind. Like, no, there's no designer. And he started battling in him, and slowly he finally submitted and became a Christian. But it was something so simple, just noticing the design of the ear canal and everything that had to be designed by somebody. But he and so many others have come out of that system and told us, here's what we're all about. He talked about in there with his wife. They would work 50, 60 hours a week, both of them, for the communist cause and not take one penny. They had other jobs to pay their own bills. That's how this commitment, no, this is the cause. It's the most purposeful thing in life. Well, that's why we are where we are, because these masters of deceit, and Satan specifically has a loyal following that are far more committed than we are, and it's sobering. Some of the Marxist strategy that just talk about briefly, because it helps you identify things today that you see. 3 things they always do. They always tell you where they are going. You don't have to guess. What are they going to work toward next? They tell you. They always tell you. Number 2, they always state their purpose as the opposite of what it is. It's always the exact opposite. So one classic example I love when I was studying communism, there's a group in Chicago, a communist group funded by the communists, backed by the communists, supporting communist causes. The name of the group is the Committee to Defend the Bill of Rights. I wonder how many conservatives have given them money. That's all we're about, is defending the Bill of Rights, which, of course, all they're about is tearing those down with chaos and big government so they can eventually have total control. Number 3, they always accuse you of doing what they are doing. I mean, it's so classic. It's very effective to do that.
No, you're hateful when, they're the ones hateful. You're an insurrectionist, when they're trying to have an insurrection. They always do that, though, so it helps you be prepared for those attacks, because if you're not, they catch you off guard. Because the last thing in the world a Christian would want to be called, you're so hateful. Because instantly all you're going to start doing is defending yourself, because you realize I'm not like that, but somehow they think I am. And so instead of standing up for what's right, you're trying to defend yourself, and then you look guilty because you're trying to defend yourself. And so we need to realize, no, I'm not interested in your little word games and redefinitions of things. And you need to speak the truth boldly, but that's important. Some of the things we live through, I've studied a lot of. Vladimir Lenin was the founder of the Soviet Union, and a lot of people today aren't as informed about him and who he was, but he was a genius of manipulating people to get them to do what you want them to do. And we see it playing out in America today. He wrote a book in 1902 called What Must Be Done? And here's an outline. If we want world communism, here's what has to happen. But some of the things he talked about in there, do you remember the George Floyd events, a couple summers ago? And that will probably be returning this year, I would suspect, before the election and stuff. But this is 1915. Listen to what Lenin said about that, how you do that. Socialists must explain to the masses that they have no other road of salvation except the revolutionary overthrow of their governments, and that advantage must be taken of these governments' embarrassments in the present war precisely for that purpose. So you're taking advantage of anything that happens that's embarrassing or not the way things should be or whatever, but you're also preaching you cannot fix this system. It has to be overthrown. There's no solution. That's why there's never progress made from their point of view. As long as America exists, no, the battle is raging on. It must be eliminated completely. But they were masters of doing that. And so much of what he wrote back then, you can see it being played out today. How many of you have seen the film Agenda, Grinding America Down? Okay, so a lot of you, so I won't get into too much of that, but some of the key parts of that people need to understand, those that haven't seen it, real quickly. The Fabian Socialist Society in 1883, they started, and their goal was world communism, but they said, we're going to work towards socialism. And real quickly, the reason every communist is always working towards socialism, not communism, is you have to go through socialism to get to communism. You can't go from a free enterprise capitalist system, as they would call it, to communism. It's impossible. And so they're always working to implement socialist ideas. Why? Because then once you become a socialist government, the government has control of energy and control of a lot of the jobs and a lot of things. So they have more power than to be totalitarian when they need to be. For our society today to go straight to totalitarian control, it's just too rough. Because we own the property still, we own the businesses, we own the things that are creating wealth. And so it's like we're a formidable opposition to them, but if they can slowly keep raising those tax rates and raising the regulation and having big business crush all competition through passing laws and things that favor the big businesses and things that are working together with big government, then the poor of the people they're very easy to control and they're very easy to take over, and they know that. But the Fabians said, we're going to work toward creating a socialist world through evolution instead of revolution. And what that means is the slow change over time. We're going to just slowly start poisoning the well in every country of the world that the idea of a socialist world is a good world. That's what we need to be working toward. And then, of course, the Marxist communists were going to work toward violent revolution. So together, they're both working toward the same cause, but some was appealing more to the intellectuals, and some is appealing more to the rebellious and those that just want to do what they want to do. A lot of people in America, they are kind of out of touch with this because when the Berlin Wall fell down, and the Soviet Union dissolved in 91. Oh, communism's done. And so that means they've changed their plans, but they haven't. Their goal is world communism. Lenin said it 100 plus years ago, you know, we are going to encircle the last bastion of capitalism, the United States of America. And when we fight them, we won't need to fire a shot. They will fall like a ripe fruit into our hands. He knew all the things they were working at inside of our country, and like my films talk about, to degrade the culture, to break down family structure, break down and penetrate the churches and the educational system and Hollywood and the music industry, everything where the culture becomes rotten, so it is producing people who are rotten, and it collapses on itself. And that's what he said, we only need to fight when the final battle comes with them. Once we have slowly encircled them and taken over the rest of the world, they'll just collapse. That is still the goal today, 100%. The communist Chinese are working with the Russians, and they always have. They acted like there was a divide purposefully, so we wouldn't be concerned about this whole part of the world's communist and this whole part of the world's communist. And so they've pretended that there was conflict between both of them back when the Soviet Union was there and Red China was growing and some of the different communist countries, because they didn't want us to then take it more seriously when we realized, wait a minute, this is becoming a huge threat to us. But they're working hand in glove today. But the Chinese Communist Party, back in 1949, that's the year they took over China, 1949. And America, our State Department, was the key ones that put Mao into power. But when that happened, that very week, Chairman Mao's right-hand man, in his diary, he wrote 100 years to take America. I mean, showing how, just think, if we did something great today, that very week we're not setting a goal for 100 years from now. But that's how the communists think. It's always 50 and 100-year increments. They don't even deal with less than that. It's always 50 to 100 years, every goal they set. That's what their goal is. So in 1949, they said, we will take America by 2049. Then about 10 years ago, they said, we're not going to need to 2049, and they upped it to 2035. They go, we will be able to take them by 2035. Then just a year or so ago, some more stuff leaked out from some of their meetings they have with their military brass, and they said, we think by 2028 we will be able to physically take over the United States of America. Well, have you heard that on the news? I mean, that's how serious this threat is, and they're dead set on it. We know just with our open borders, and it's been covered by Tucker and some other ones, at least 40,000 Chinese military-age men have come across that we know of. Of course, and all the gotaways and all that stuff we don't know about, but at least 40,000. Well, if you had 150 dedicated people, you could take out America by taking the power grid down very easily, which would start to create the crisis of things where the whole thing would just turn into a civil war and self-destruction as people get hungry and then they start attacking each other. So you get 40,000 literal military troops here that know what they are doing. You know, anything is possible. And I'm not saying that just scary, but I'm saying you can't live in a bubble when you don't know your number one enemy in the world, the one that you are dependent on for everything that makes your country successful. All economic productivity, all medicines, all everything come from them. And you can't know, hey, they said they're going to take us over by 2028 in 4 years with troops on the ground, not just an economic issue. They think they can do that. And I don't know if it'll happen or not, but the fact that they're talking like that should sober anyone to go, I probably need to pull out of my little, whatever TV world or Hollywood world and realize, again, we live in sober times. And the Marxist communist threat, who are Satan's disciples on this earth, they are dead earnest in accomplishing their goals. And they love death and destruction just like their commander-in-chief does. That's all he has to sell, is to steal, to kill, and destroy. That's all they have to offer to. That's how you know, oh, I know who they're working for. You come up through the 30s, Antonio Gramsci, a lot of you are familiar with that name. He's the one that came up with the strategy. Here's how you take over a country that believes in God. Back in the early 20s, he went to the Soviet Union and talked to Vladimir Lenin and said, I'm a communist from Italy. I've got a strategy for you. If you're going to try to have world communism, your strategy of revolution, violent revolutions is not going to work in countries that believe in God. And Lenin goes, oh, yes, it will. And he kicked him out of the Soviet Union. He wasn't interested in hearing his plan because it will be world revolution. And when he went back to Italy, he got thrown in prison by Mussolini because he was a communist. And he spent the rest of his life in prison. But he wrote a book called Notes from Prison. And in that book, he outlined, here's what you do. You take over all the institutions of influence of a culture so you can change the people from within. That's why they went after the seminaries and divinity schools. That's why they went into the teachers' colleges to get education. That's why they went into Hollywood and all the different things in the media. They realized if we are the ones talking to the people, then we will be the ones that are educating them, and we'll be able to create a person that thinks the idea of socialism sounds pretty good. Man, that'll be wonderful. A one world government, who could be against that? Be no more war, no more hunger, no more anything. This is going to be great. Well, that's what they did, and they've been very successful, as you know. The Frankfurt School, key people from there, they went into the top universities and things. An interesting point too. Back in the 1930s with Whitaker Chambers, he was one of the communists infiltrating our government. But we now know from M. Stanton Evans, he's one of the gentlemen in Agenda. He's not living anymore. He died of cancer. But his last book, he documented from congressional record and declassified documents that in FDR's administration in the 1930s America, he had over 200 Soviet agents. 200. We thought it was like 3 or 4. He documented from declassified documents, there was over 200. And then it makes sense. That's why our State Department from the 30s to today is always, everything they push is anti-American and pro-communist. You're like, why are they doing that? Why are they doing this? It's just crazy. As you dig in, you go, but you realize, because they weren't with us. They might give a good conservative sounding speech, so you're like, oh, that's a good guy, but what they're doing behind the scenes, if you study the 20th century, communism would have been done by the early 1920s if the elites, the State Department, all the communists in our government and media, if they hadn't been pushing to, we got to feed them, they're running out of food, we got to do this stuff, they would have been long gone, as China would have disintegrated long ago. They would never even come to power in China without the help of our State Department. Our government 100% put the communists in charge of China when you study the details. But Harry Dexter White, he was one of the top guys in the Treasury. We know he's a Soviet spy today. He's the one that was put in charge of starting the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. A communist, we know now. Alger Hiss, who was the right-hand man of FDR, he was put in charge of writing the charter for and becoming the first head of the United Nations. So as you dig in, you just go, oh my goodness, these geniuses get themselves wherever they need to be in positions, so they're the ones making the decisions. So they're setting up the very systems to benefit what they are doing, world conquest, and to discourage and go against anyone that's doing things God's way with freedom and allowing people to be free to do the things God would want them to do. What time am I supposed to be finished? This way?
About a quarter after.
Okay, good. It's also very interesting, I like to talk about how strategic they are in that they're so planned, and I'm going to encourage you all more on that at the end or the next talk, but they always have a game plan. Just like I said, Lenin wrote the book in 1902, What Must Be Done. And so every guy that's a good socialist world. They had a field manual to read and go, okay, this is what we're going to be working toward. So everyone was always on the same page. But the side doesn't even know next week what they're doing most of the time. You can't motivate them for 2 years for an election cycle or anything. But they have been so successful. One of the key books, it's a classic from 1932, was written by William Z. Foster. He was the head of the Communist Party USA. It's called Towards Soviet America. And in there he goes, if you want America to become like the Soviet Union, here's what you need to do. And if you read those today, they've done every single thing in there. You're like, oh my word. But they had a plan. So even 100 years ago, every person that's left-leaning, sympathies toward a communist world, which sounds great. Yeah, let's just share everything and just live in peace and harmony forever. But of course, that's the lie that is sold to cause people to submit to giving up some of their liberties temporarily so this system can be created. But of course, the point was never to give it back to them. It was just an ingenious strategy by the elites to go, let's get these idiots to work toward setting up the system where we'll be able to totally control them forever. And that's all it is. And that's the type of person it appeals to. Another key that Lenin gave us, and we've seen this has happened in every part of American society, but he said the best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves. Think about that. That's their whole strategy outlined right there. What does that mean? Anything you deem as an enemy, that means you're going to infiltrate it and subvert it from within, where then you are controlling that, whether it's the church or whatever. That's why the church is a powerful institution. We got to get into the seminaries. And they said back in the 50s, when some of the top communists were interviewed that had defected from communism after Stalin's slaughter of 20+ million people, when asked, what are you guys doing? He said, the number one thing we've been doing is going to the seminaries in America. It's the number one thing, where we go get the degrees and then stay on as the professors so we could push the church in our direction, where it's about social religion instead of about the Bible, so we could then use the energies of the church. And we see it today in social justice, which is just Marxist philosophy. All these different things, they've done it. That's why if you go to the United Methodist Church down the street here or whatever, the different ones, you go in there, you look at their bulletin board, it'll be a hotbed for every radical red cause there is. I go and purposely, whenever I'm traveling around the country, I'll go in the United Methodist or some of the other mainline denominations, and sure enough, their bulletin boards, Black Lives Matter protest and all these different things. I go, the Marxists know we've succeeded in these churches. Now, all the energy of that church is to push our radical causes that, of course, aren't about making Black lives be valuable. What is it? What did I tell you at the beginning? What is the Black Lives Matter movement all about? It's the opposite. So it means Black lives don't mean anything at all. We're going to prove it. We're going to go stir them up to burn down their own neighborhoods, where then they don't have the possibility of getting a job, of buying anything, and we're going to defund the police in their communities, where they're going to be living in hell on earth, and they're going to get arrested. We're going to slip out in the night. The Marxists slip out in the night. Those are the people who are going to have the criminal records, never be able to get a job, never be able to do anything because their whole community is destroyed. It's about saying we will use the black community like we have for 100 years, and if we can get something from it by creating chaos, dissension, conflict, great, that's all we're about. But it's always the opposite, and you have to know that. So right when you hear a new great cause, just go, okay, flip it, whatever it says, okay, that means it's about this. Now if I watch this carefully, I've been studying this year, so the day the Black Lives Matter thing went up, the day George Floyd's, I go, that's the Marxist. And you're going to watch. And then sure enough, on their own website, the leaders of Black Lives Matter say we are trained Marxist organizers. They, with their own words, and they still have that video on there like they're proud of it, instead of going, that exposes you. A communist isn't for anything except destruction. They're not trying to help any group of people. So all this stuff took place in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. And in the 60s, they thought, I think we're ready. I think we've had a lot of influence. I think we can have our communist world revolution. And so the 60s radicals started stirring up the college students on the campuses all over this country and really working toward literally where they all of a sudden you get the poor people killing off the rich people, you get the young people killing off the old people, and they were hoping that was going to happen. And it didn't, but a lot of you don't realize this. I was even shocked. I lived through this. I was just a young boy at the time, but this is how successful they were in almost starting a communist revolution. In an 18-month period, this is from the FBI's records here, in an 18-month period in 1971 and into 72, okay? 18 months, just a year and a half. Guess how many bombings of buildings there was in America? Just in 18 months in America in the 70s, when we were still pristine compared to today. There was over 2,500 buildings exploded. Almost 5 a day for 18 months, 5 a day blowing up. Police stations, bridges, different buildings and things. But it didn't, they thought it would just spread then like it had in other countries, but we're so blessed and we have such a Christian heritage, it didn't make us think, okay, now we need to rise up and start killing each other because God said, thou shalt not kill. So we can't do that. And so that's when they realized then, oh, okay, Gramsci was right. And so if you look at all those radicals, in fact, a famous one, Bill Ayers, you've probably heard of, he was the mentor of Barack Obama. He was one of the founders of the Weather Underground, who did most of those 2,500 bombings, just that one group. Almost all of them were that one group. Guess what he spent his entire life doing? A lot of people don't know this. He was a college professor at the University of Chicago, but he was on the committee that writes all the curriculum for our government schools for over 20 years. You wonder why the curriculum got so radical. He knew that's where you have influence. If I'm writing the curriculum as a literally someone that's blown up 2,000 buildings in America, killed police officers, everything, I'm teaching at a college because that's always good to get some radicals stirred up here. But I'm going to write the curriculum for the government schools in Alabama and in Florida and all these different states that think they're conservative, or the kids aren't going to be conservative because I'm the one that's raising them. And that's what they did. And it's shocking. A lot of people don't realize that. Then into the 1970s, when they all just started going into education and media and Hollywood at an incredible level. All of them, all the top ones, you follow them, that's where they went. And they realized, no, we have to raise the next generation if we want this world revolution. 1971, Saul Alinsky wrote a book called Rules for Radicals, which I'm sure you've heard of. All that book is him plagiarizing Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin was the genius. Saul Alinsky just repackaged the old words in modern contemporary language for the 60s radicals. And as you know, that book in the front of it's dedicated to Lucifer, in which you see that and it makes you laugh because it makes you know some of them do know exactly what they're doing. I think there's a lot of useful idiots that don't know that. They've bought into the lie a communist world would be fair and just. In fact, our children have. Do you know that? I mean, just a poll a summer or two ago, when our young people in America were asked, what form of government you think America should have? 70% said socialism. But what shocked me more than that, 30% said communism, which made me realize they don't know what either one of those things are. But the fact it's been so held up to them, when just in the 20th century, it killed 130, 40 million people in times of peace that we know of. And our 30% of our kids go, yeah, that's what we need. That's why you homeschool if you do. And if you don't, you need to. Because you have to. Nothing is more precious than your children. Nothing. That's the future. That's why they want those children so badly, because they know if we got them and they're fighting their own parents on our side in the future, we can't lose, and they can't. I'm saying this hell on earth they're working to create, they're going to succeed if they keep taking all of our children and brainwashing them to believe, no, communism is a just, fair, wonderful system. Because, of course, do you understand how our textbooks today in the government schools don't even hardly ever mention, even the history of the 20th century does not even mention communism, doesn't even mention it. In fact, Diana West, who's a famous writer on our side today, she was a little bit liberal-minded. And 20 years ago, when her son's textbook, and her son was in the government schools in California, she was reading his textbook and reading it to him. She goes, I realized his textbook that was titled History of the 20th Century did not mention communism. And she goes, and she was just, she started digging, why would that not be mentioned? And now she's a famous conservative writer, some of the most incredible books ever from our point of view, because she realized, oh my goodness, because they're the ones writing our textbooks. They're the ones that are at the teachers' colleges. They're the ones doing all this stuff to raise the next generation. It's really powerful when you see that. Another key thing that we learned, which was so powerful, back in the late 60s and the 70s, we had several KGB agents defect to America. And they came in, that seems like that would be a valuable source. You got to make sure it's a real thing and they're not, doing misinformation or something to play into the game. But it was clear they were running for their life, and there was a death warrant on them for that. But they came and they told us, one is Anatoly Golitsyn. He came and he said, listen, they realize they cannot, this is in the late 60s, they realize they cannot outspend you. Your system of capitalism produces so much wealth that in an arms race, we can't do it. We're trying, but we can't. So they are starting to organize things now where they're going to fake their own death, and this is coming, and he told us this stuff. And the CIA interviewed him, and the FBI interviewed him, and I've read some of those interviews, and they say, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He finally got so frustrated, in the early 1980s, he wrote a book called New Lies for Old, and it's published in 1984. And he said in that book, if you read it, it's pretty powerful. He said all these things they might do, and they've done almost every single one of them. But he said, this deception is going to be so great. He goes, I think they'll even take down the Berlin Wall. And when that happened 5 years later, we're all shocked, like, oh my goodness, we could never have dreamed this would happen. This is unbelievable. We won the Cold War, and this is so wonderful. And he told us, this KGB said, no, I bet you I wouldn't be surprised if they do that. They are so desperate in need of funding, and we have given them billions every year since then. If you'll be nice, communists, and then we've opened up our patent offices to them. They were getting behind in technology, and so they knew we need to, oh, no, perestroika, glasnost, we're done for now, is this, we want peace. And so we say, oh, if you'll be nice, communists, because they still have all their weapons, we will fund you, and we have. We've given them hundreds of billions of dollars over the last 30 years since the wall came down. And we've opened up our patent offices so they have all of our rights to all of our technologies, and they've used it. They now have supersonic nuclear warheads. Some of them now, the latest tests show they go over 15,000 miles an hour. We don't have anything, even a fraction of that. Nothing. And they have the multi-head things where one missile coming over at 15,000 miles an hour. We have nothing that could stop that, nothing that could even do anything with it. It can take out 25 entire cities, and each of the 25 warheads inside of one missile, one ICBM, they said is over 100 times the power of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 25 of those, 100 times that in one missile. It would take out entire eastern United States, every major city, one missile coming out. I mean, you're like, oh, yeah, we opened up our patent office. We stopped inventing and perfecting. And again, because the military, like so many other things, is one of the areas they sought to get into leadership positions. That's why you got the Millies and Lloyd, all these people. You're like, that guy's not even pro-American. What is he doing as head of the military thing? And of course, a lot of the guys and gals in there are wonderful people, and they went in for the right reasons. But they're finding out, wait a minute. There's a problem here. This isn't about America. This isn't about defending America. It's about so many different things than we thought it was. And that's why the rates of people signing up are dropping and dropping and dropping, because they're like, we don't want to be part of this thing because it's not about our country anymore. Another key thing that happened, and this even kind of shocked me, having studied this for a long time. My dad, it's so funny how God prepares you for what you're going to do, even if you don't know what it is. In 1977, when I was 12 years old, my dad gave me a book called You Can Trust the Communist. It was a great book by Dr. Fred Schwartz on communism. He said, you need to read this because you're going to need to understand about this. I still have that same old book that he gave me with my little name written in it. And I thought, isn't that funny? Just to put those seeds where I understood the communist thought and mind, not knowing at 40 God's gonna say, okay, get out of the restaurant business and go make a movie on communism. We're like, what? What are you talking about? So, but that was so neat. But during Trump's administration, Comey and Brennan, okay, so the head of the FBI and the head of the CIA, all right? Both of those two guys admitted they had been communists. And they're the head of the FBI and the head of the CIA. And they said, oh, we're not anymore, but we used to be. In 1980, they admitted they had voted for Communist Party USA against Ronald Reagan. I mean, and I saw that. My dad actually sent it to me. He saw it, and he's 90. And he said to me, he goes, look at these. Look what they did. Because he had studied this his life. I go, that even shocks me. They're working their way up where they're the head of your intelligence agencies. The very head, not just in there, of course. And I was like, that is unbelievable. But that's what we've been up against. A key part for you to understand, too, is in 92, because once the Berlin Wall came down, once the Soviet Union dissolved, they realized, okay, we need a vehicle to implement totalitarian world communism, but it can't look like that's what it is. And they realized it was the environmental movement. Mikhail Gorbachev, a lot of people don't know this, they haven't studied it. The day he stepped down as the last dictator and mass murdering thug, our media made him out to be so great, but I've interviewed so many people that grew up in the Soviet Union since then, and they said his last few years, even when he was acting like things were changing, he said he mowed down hundreds of college students on our college campuses, just murdered them. And your media did not, your media was in our country because they're covering this great transformation, and they didn't even cover it. So you guys didn't know about it. He is a mass murdering thug that our media held up as the great savior of the 20th century and everything. Oh, he's ending communism, isn't this wonderful? But the day he stepped down, he moved to San Francisco, where he spent the rest of his life, and he started Green Cross International, which was an environmental group. That should have been our first heads up. Why would a communist dictator who just raped and pillaged the environment in the Soviet Union when he was there? I mean, they have zero, communist cares zero about the environment. I mean, they're dumping, nuclear waste into their own rivers and streams and the ocean. They could care less. They're worried about world communism. I don't care if everything's polluted. I'll make sure I have something clean to drink. That's all they care about. But that's what happened. So then in 1992, the United Nations, started by communists, for communists, came out with Agenda 21. And when you read it back then, I remember reading it back in 1992, you looked at all the goals they were working toward, like the abolition of the private ownership of vehicles. This is 1992. And George H.W. Bush, our great conservative, he was the first one to sign on, which got all the countries of the world to sign on. And he was rotten to the core. I don't have time to get into that. But so you see that and you realize, what? That's great, that was in 92, real radical talk. Today we can see, oh, that is where they're heading. They're gonna get us to go electric first, and then they shut the power off, and you don't have a vehicle ownership, or the freedom to move about and go and do what you want to do, which they don't want. So, and then they've, over the last 32 years, they've updated, now it's called Agenda 2035. But I just tell you that whole movement, that's all it is about, is implementing world totalitarian government. I flew up to Vancouver, British Columbia several years back to interview Dr. Patrick Moore, who was the co-founder of Greenpeace. So he's a guy who cares about the environment. And I said, Dr. Moore, they're in his home with them, and he still totally cares about the environment, but real things like we all would. We all care about the environment. That's why they pick that, too. It's a clever thing. When you pick something, everybody cares about this. We're just going to define what it means to be an environmentalist, and it will be things that give us more power and control over the people. But we're not going to be working toward all the areas we could be, making it, cleaner water, air, and stewarding our resources and things. So, but I said, Dr. Moore, why did you leave Greenpeace? I want to know. And he said, because the communists took it over. And he said, and he's not a conservative guy, he's not a Christian guy. But he said all they wanted to do is destroy capitalism worldwide, free enterprise in the entire globe. And he goes, the very policies they're implementing is destroying the environment. So he has a vengeance against them because he sees how evil this is. He's someone that even from a liberal, he's definitely a liberal mindset, but he cares about people and suffering of people in Africa. And he had a tender heart when I was talking to him. He goes, all the black children in Africa are suffering because of these environmental policies. He goes, we lose over 1 million every year just from the policies that are being implemented. 1 million black, little under age of 5, die every year, just the policies we've forced on the continent of Africa. And that made, I was like, he had that heart that I was like, isn't that great? So that's a key thing to know about. But here, real quickly, and if you've heard me say these before, just have it be where you get these down, because you need these. The environmental movement is never going away. Okay, 50 years from now, we'll be fighting that, even if we've been successful. Why do I know that? Because you cannot step down from a movement that's called saving the planet to something that's less formidable than that. You're going to lose all your troops. That's like it sounds like the greatest cause in history. Oh, what are you doing with your time? Just saving the planet. I mean, that sounds so noble, and they love that. The communists love you package everything in morality. And they always said that in there. Package and always make it look like your opponent is immoral, and you're the moral one on the high ground, and they're dirty and against people, and again, when it's, of course, the exact opposite. But here's the 3 lies of environmentalists you have to know, where you can just spew it off to people so they get it. The first foundational lie is CO2 is a pollutant. Okay, which if you're homeschooled, that sounds like a joke, right? Or if you went to a regular school and didn't go to the government schools. CO2 is plant food, and we don't have near enough of it in the atmosphere, is the reality. And so you go, why did they pick CO2? Because everything productive produces CO2, so they knew then it would give them control of businesses, because if you're using electricity, you're producing CO2. If you're transporting things, you're using CO2. If you're breathing, you're using CO2, you're expelling CO2. So we got to pick something that makes everything we hate our enemy, which mankind is the top of the list, but they can't quite say that yet, although they're open about, no, we need to cut world population down to a couple 100 million people. So, but the facts are this, and greenhouse growers know this, the optimum level of CO2 for everything that is green is 1,600 parts per million. And right now, the current level of CO2 in the atmosphere worldwide is 400 parts per million. We're at 1/4 of the optimum level of CO2 in the atmosphere for everything that is green, if you really cared about the green. That's another example of my thing. They call themselves the green movement. What's their whole ambition? Cut CO2, which the plants need. And every time you double CO2, which is pretty amazing the way God designed things, every time you double CO2, plant growth efficiency increases 35%. So if you have a tomato plant growing right outside of a greenhouse at 400 parts per million, and you have one right inside the greenhouse where you have 800 parts per million, that plant will produce 35% more tomatoes. Exact same plant, same size, same everything. That's how much it loves CO2. And if you can double it again to 1,600 parts per million, it goes up another 35%, and it's amazing. Oak trees will grow to full maturity in 50 years instead of 100 years. And it's amazing, but their movement is a green movement to cut that. And another key fact on that is once CO2 drops below 150 parts per million, everything green dies. So we're right at the bottom of the scale. Most of Earth history, it's been way higher than it is today. And we don't have any effect on it at all. It's the oceans, evaporation, and different things. But if we could produce it, it would be a wonderful thing. If we could produce enough to make it actually go up in volume, it would be wonderful. The second thing they tell us is there's too many people, which you study any demographer writes papers on populations. We're getting ready to head into a crisis the world's never seen, with global populations declining forever as far as the eye can see, because people are not having children worldwide. The birth rates continue to just drop and drop and drop. Even in Muslim countries, a lot of people don't know that. Iran right now is at 1.8 children per woman. All our Western ideas have gone in there. They want stuff instead of kids, and people are just not having them. All of Western civilization, all the European countries are in complete free fall. They haven't been having enough children. You have to have 2.1 children per woman to stay stagnant. And they're down at 1.2, 1.3. So they're all dying off. Most of the civilized countries of the world. And that's where we are. But they keep pushing these things on us. But that is a key one to really know. It's a religion. It is their religion. And it is something that is just devastating to the planet. It's devastating to the human beings on the planet. And so all this plan, got just a couple minutes here to close. All this is coming together, and I'm going to talk about solutions more the next hour. You just need to know it. It's come in different packages, different lists of goals, different things, the communist goals, this goal, whatever. But a lot of you are probably familiar with the World Economic Forum. They're kind of the front of this thing now to give it legitimacy and make it sound like, oh, it's an economic issue. Because everyone cares about economics because that's your pocketbook. So they go, but it has nothing to do with that. But as you look at their goals, their number one goal for 2030 is the laughable one, but it's not laughable because they mean it. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. That's their thing. Well, right when I heard that from studying communism, I go, wait a minute. The first plank of the Communist Manifesto is the abolition of all private property. Same thing. That's all this is. I just want you to know that. They've learned to repackage. They've learned it's much easier to brainwash and propagandize people to get them to willfully go along than to have to force them to go along. So that's why they realize you get the control of the institutions of influence. We're going to make it where the person that doesn't believe the world's in crisis, they're a crazy nut, and everyone should be against them. They're going to just manipulate things so they get us to attack each other, the ignorant attacking those that are informed, so that they can keep marching toward their agenda with this lie that, oh, it's going to be best for the planet. And of course, none of this is. It's all death and destruction of everything. But that's, I don't know, but God picked us. He picked us to be the ones on this earth when all this is going on. That's why I know He wants us to understand the times. I know He wants us to be informed and educating others and training our children to understand the times. You young people in here, I just want you to know that you don't look at this as, oh, it's a discouraging future. No, you're going to have the most meaningful life in the last 1,000 years because you're going to really be standing good against pure black evil and be able to push the ideas, the biblical ideas of freedom and liberty and accountability before God and all these. And the gospel, as this unfolds, whether we're successful or not, it's going to be the greatest time to share the gospel ever. Crisis always is. That's what God uses. When you're in the midst of crisis, people are looking for hope, and they're purposely creating crises all around us because it's part of their strategy. And so people are going to get more desperate. The suicide rates are going to continue to climb like they have. And so, but when you have the answer for the person thinking like that, you need to make sure you're talking to someone like that. Go, no. Your life is incredibly valuable, and you're perfect the way God made you. Don't change a thing, but there's a cause to be fighting for. You need to understand what's going on and stuff. So it's really, to me, it's things always go in cycles. There's something called the fourth turning. And if you study history, there's these 80 to 90-year, 100-year cycles of history, and they make sense. We see it when we read the Bible. They came out of Egypt. And for a little bit, whatever, and then they, why'd you bring us out here to die? It's like we're so quick to forget and to be ungrateful and stuff. But there's these cycles, and if you look at America, we've been in these cycles. We're in the fourth turning right now, which is the last 20 to 30-year cycle of a full cycle, 80 to 100 years. And it's always crisis. It's always absolute devastation. And it's always dramatic change. Sometimes it can be changed for the good, and sometimes it'll change for the bad. But you go back 80 years, it was the Depression of World War II. And there was just total devastation. And it came out, and thankfully God blessed, and it was freedom and prosperity, whatever. But that prosperity always brings you to a place of apathy, like, oh, everything's great. And then you're back into crisis. And we are in the crisis now. And it's amazing because the cycle ends 2030 to 2035 is when this current fourth turning ends. And you go, and so it's a pivotal time in history. So it's a wonderful time to be alive because you might be able to affect that change for the Lord in standing for truth boldly. And yeah, you might have to pay a great price, which is very likely. But then who are those people that pay the high price? They're the people we always admire in history. Those are our heroes. If I were to ask you each to write a list of your heroes, most of you go, they at the Alamo, they died. It's because they were willing to pay that price. They were the heroes of the next generation. So God is allowing us to live at such a time. He might choose to say, those are the heroes of the next generation. Where those kids will look up and go, man, I want to be like that someday. And so, but that's where we are, and it's sobering times, but it's a great time because God has purposely picked each of us to be here, and He did that for a reason. So I'm encouraging you in the next hour, do you know what that reason is? Or do we're here for that. The world tells you, no, you're here to save up and get a brand new. We just a Ferrari passed us on the way here. And I was talking to my daughter about that. I go, some people, that's their whole life is just to save up to get that or whatever. And then they'll die and they'll realize that was so meaningless. It just didn't, with buying that vehicle, you could have had the Bible translated into a few languages that it's not in right now. And then for all eternity, you'd go, oh my word, it changed these people's lives. If you go to the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C., there's still a couple thousand languages, not one word of the Bible has been translated into. And they'll do it there. I think it's $125,000. They will translate the Bible into that language. And I was like, if I was a billionaire, I'd come in there, all of them today. You have them done tomorrow as fast as you can and get that out there. But we're all preoccupied because it's purposeful, because our flesh is drawn to the lies and the deceit. Oh, if I have that, I'll be happy. If I have this, no, you won't have anything that makes you happy except a loving Savior. And when you know you're obeying what He's asked you to do, that's happiness, fulfillment, and purpose on this earth. But anyway, He had all of us here for this. And so I think it's a great time to be alive. And anyway, do we close in prayer? Okay, I'll close in prayer, and then we'll talk some more positive, I guess you might say, things when I come back. But you have to know reality. A lot of people don't listen to stuff like this because they just don't want to know. And ignorance will be no excuse when we stand before God. Well, I didn't know people were dying and going to hell. I didn't know my neighbor was ready to commit suicide because I never talked to them. I didn't know God's not interested in that. So, and He's not on this either. When He gave us the blessing of being born and being raised in the greatest area of in world history, nothing has been blessed like the United States by God. And He said, I want you to be born there. And so to not take that soberly and like, wow, He picked that for me. I need to be very grateful and wanting to preserve this for others to enjoy as well. So, dear God, we just thank You for Your blessings. We thank You for this time together. We thank You for the Bible so we know what is true and what is lies. Thank You for the ability to educate others, to try to learn and understand and be a part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Just help all these families here. Just help them to take seriously all the different duties and responsibilities You've given them, where they will do them with excellence as a light to this community and as salt that will preserve and protect us. And we thank You for Your blessings, and we thank You for allowing us to be here at this time. Help us all to be faithful in everything that we do. And we love You. In Jesus' name, amen.